Shalom, brothers and sisters. I hope you're doing fine wherever you are today. So, this video of today will expose how racism is benefiting white folks even today. Remember, most of African authors, most of African based authors, when they go to an interview, they usually ask them, why are you complaining about racism? What do you think about racism? Why can't you stop complaining about what happened in decades ago? But little did you know that these people are still benefiting from this until today. So this video that I'm going to play you is going to show you how truly this happens. And this is a white folk. He has his channel. I'm gonna put the description for the full video in the description so that you can go and check it out if you have time. So I don't want to say much because I've been receiving hate comments from some people. I believe that they are white folks, some of them, saying that why you keep on complaining about race? Why don't you think about other better topic to talk about? Now, this video will prove to you that this thing still interferes with black people, especially in the USA. So let's dive into the video and then say something at the end of it.
Hello and welcome to Factually. I'm Adam Conover. Thank you so much for joining me on the show again. You know, we've talked a lot on this show and on my other platforms about how specific policies and institutions in this country have harmed African Americans. In fact, were designed to harm them and to benefit white people instead, and how this created the racial inequality that we see in this country today. Just to take a few examples, redlining made it impossible for African Americans to access loans or buy homes outside narrowly confined areas, which constrained their ability to build wealth as white people were able to do. We have a school system that's based around property taxes, so rich homeowners in wealthier, whiter areas get better educations than poorer people who are shut out of the housing market. And we have a racist policing and criminal justice system that targets black people disproportionately and that locks them up for longer on average. So when today we see things like income inequality, health disparities, education disparities, you name it, between black and white Americans, we need to remember that they were the outcome of these specific policy decisions. Now, I know a lot of you have heard this argument before, but there's a flip side of it that we don't consider as often, which is that this system that was designed to harm black people was also designed to help white people. White people benefit from mass homeownership and easy access to credit, higher education, and a criminal justice system that protects rather than harms them on average. And the reason we don't often think of it this way is that white people are taught not to think of ourselves as even having a race. Oh, everyone else has a race, but not us. We are the regulars, the default. But it's bullshit. The system of racial hierarchy we live under does assign us a race. It just gives us a benefit for having that race. And what we as white people almost never do is confront those benefits. Ask, what are they? And how do we feel about them? And what should we do as a result? I mean, think about this. Over the past couple hundred years, black American writers and thinkers have done an enormous amount of incredible work asking and answering the question of what it means to be black in America. But by comparison, there's been almost no white writers who have asked the same question about what it means to be white in America. And you know what? If having this conversation offends or disgusts you, you can feel free to shrink away, like so many others have. On the show today.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
So let's talk about this right off the bat. We, as we sit here, are both white people. I am a white person. I assume that you would call yourself a white person too. You have written a book about racism in America, and here we are having a conversation about it. Why did you feel it was important as a white author to write about this issue? And I'm really curious what's important about that perspective.
Right. Well, I wanted to write about sort of how racism works for white people because I didn't know how to talk about it, right? Like I didn't really have any idea how to think about being white other than to sort of be like, oh, sorry about the privilege, right? But that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
Right. So I had been working for a long time as a racial and social equity reporter. And it just became really clear to me that, I'd been raised to be colorblind, but that wasn't really how things work in this country, right? It's a great goal. It's not really how things work. And I knew a little bit about how to understand race and equity in the US when it came to people of color, right? Racism is bad for them. But I realized I really had no idea how to talk about it, the other half of it, right? Which is that racism often gives advantages to white folks.
And it's part of the conversation we almost never have. I mean, even white Americans who are sympathetic to the issue of racism, are aware of it, say, oh my God, that's so terrible, how black people are treated, they read the right books, they watch the right movies. Michael Keaton knocks down the sign off the wall, or is it Kevin Costner? Who was it in Hidden Figures? He knocks off the bathroom sign. Do you remember this?
Right, it's Kevin Costner. Right,
it's Kevin Costner.
Down the sign. That's a great moment, right?
He pulls down the sign. Oh, he fixed racism forever. Oh my God, I found out racism exists. Let me fix that for you. Bang, knock the sign down. We did it. Hooray! That's so many white people's experience of what racism is in America. But even folks who are maximally thoughtful about it almost never think about race in relation to themselves as white people. And in fact, a lot of white people have a revulsion or a resistance to thinking of race as even something that they possess or a label that would be applied to them. So have you felt that resistance throughout your life, and where do you think it comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely certainly, I don't come from a lot of money, and I went to a private university. So I feel like, particularly in college, right, I would be like, but what did I get for being white, right? Particularly because the way we'd talk about racial privilege would be about the experience of very affluent white people, right?
Yes.
And so I would sort of be like, what did I ever get for being white, right? Like, that's crazy. And then, you get some more experience in the world and you understand, like, oh, it works really differently for people who aren't white. And for me, like, the project of doing the sort of studying of the white bonus was kind of like, well, if we even take away these sort of soft privilege things that we talk about and instead just focus on like dollars and cents, maybe I'll learn something that's helpful.
Yeah. So what is the concept of the white bonus? Is the title of the book? What do you mean by that?
Right. So the white bonus is the amount of money that you've gotten because of racism when you're a white person, right?
Oh, I get the check every year. It's awesome.
Yeah, I know. We all get a direct check, right? No.
No, I mean, yeah. Well, I have not received such a check. So what do you mean by that bonus?
Right. So the way that I measure in the book is I say, okay, well, how much money did I or the people that I was profiling in the book, how much have we gotten from our families since we left home? And how likely is it that our families would have had that money to give us if they weren't white, right? So that just means going back through each family's history and the events in the person's life and saying, okay, like, just how likely is it, right? Like, this is not, I'm not proving this at the level of social science. I'm not sort of proving it in a courtroom, but just sort of going, all right, well, for me, for example, when my grandfather passed away, I inherited $25,000. That was really helpful for me at the time. Now, this is not the kind of money, right, that a lot of my classmates at the private university are getting from their families, right? It's much smaller. But for me, it was significant. And, then go, okay, well, how did my grandfather have that money, right? Well, he worked as a banker in mid-century America, right, at a time when, when he went into banking in 1930, in the entire country, there were only 80 Black bankers, right? And so pretty much, right, he had that job because he was white in part. And then also, right, he bought a house in the 30s that had a racial covenant on it. So if he had been a Black person, he would not have legally been allowed to live in that home and to build the wealth that he had right through that house. So I think, when I started looking at my white bonus, was like, well, like, it's pretty clear, like, any money from that grandfather, right, that's tied to his being white. And I didn't do anything to make that the case, right? But I'm still benefiting from it.
Yeah. I also think sometimes, even if you haven't received a check like that, there's a more invisible form of getting that money. I mean, I never in my 20s, after I graduated college, received a check from my parents for any reason other than a birthday gift. And, sometimes the birthday gifts are, not insignificant, but, whatever. So I guess I did receive money. Never mind. I take it back. I guess I did get some checks because they were birthday gifts. What am I talking about? Why would I have left that out? It's so strange the way we think about money. Okay, but apart from the birthday gifts, right? Let's just pretend I never got those. I remember realizing, well, hold on a second. I went to college. I have no debt. Right? My parents are able to provide that for me. And also, I know that if something were to go wrong, I would have my folks to fall back on. Early in my 20s, I decided I was going to quit my job as a web developer and do comedy full time. And I was luckily able to make a living doing that, doing freelance jobs, video editing, stuff like that, while I did the comedy until I could finally make a living at it. But why did I feel okay to take that risk? It was because, well, if things go really bad, you know, my parents will help me out. You know, I can go visit them on Long Island and stay in their bedroom or whatever it was, right? And I had friends who, in comedy, who genuinely didn't have that cushion. I had people around me who came from immigrant families who didn't have that sort of resources, for instance. And then the college itself, or why were my parents able to send me to college? Well, they were both college professors themselves, or had PhD degrees and were educators. Why did they have that? It's because my mom's dad was a World War II veteran, bought a home on the GI Bill, and benefited from the huge, influx of cash and support given to that generation, right? He lived in Michigan, Upper Michigan at the time. Plenty of people lived in Michigan, I think, who did not get that help from the federal government, buying a home, et cetera, et cetera. So regardless of the check, there's this whole basis of stability that came from multi-generations of middle-class stability granted to my family by specific policy decisions on the part of, state, local governments, federal government, that not everybody had access to.
That's correct. I mean, so the GI Bill and the New Deal are really strong examples of how advantaged white folks has been baked into American policy and sort of social, social equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so with the GI Bill, most of the education benefits were used by white folks. The way that they administered that program, right? You could sort of make the decisions about the GI Bill at the state level, right? So most Black people at the time in the U.S. lived in the South. And so the local administrators in the South, right, could decide you do or you don't get that. Same thing with the housing.
And this was in the mid-50s that they were making these decisions.
Right. And the same thing with housing, right, and sort of the mortgage guarantees as well, like under the GI Bill, right? And so you both had that, as well as most of the institutions of higher education in the South were still segregated, right?
Yeah.
And so you didn't have sufficient capacity to educate all the folks that wanted to get educated, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a huge thing that I think disappears for a lot of white folks, right? Because it's, your grandpa or your great-grandpa. But it really has a different effect depending on your race.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is intergenerational wealth, is it not? I mean, we often think of wealth as being what Bill Gates has or Elon Musk has, but we're talking about resources that families are able to grow and pass down over time that were, to some extent, given to them by policy choices, right?
Absolutely. I mean, middle-class stability is something that government created. And when government created it, they essentially restricted it to white people.
I had no idea that, the GI Bill, such a famous bill that granted middle-class security, was, so segregationist-y. That's not a word. You know what I mean? was discriminatory in that way. I mean, what other policies, created this?
Right. So in addition to the GI Bill and FHA, right, you had just general housing discrimination, right? So we had racial covenants sort of declared unconstitutional in 1948, but discriminating against people on the basis of race for housing didn't become illegal until the Housing Rights Act in 1968, right? So you have all that time before you could actually, like, as a Black person, go in and be like, no, you can't actually tell me I can't live here because of my race, right? So all those generations, all those decades of building wealth and stability, right, get left out. And so that's really important. Higher education, right? Also hugely important, particularly because you had so much segregation in it early on when it was affordable. So I think this is something really important. And Heather McGhee touches on it somewhat in her book, Some of Us. But, with the GI Bill, most of the people getting to go to college, it was covered, right? It was just free. Yeah. You could just go to college because you had the GI Bill. When you get to the boomer generation going through college, then it's a little more expensive. Like, you might need a part-time job over the summer to cover some of the tuition, right? But the states are still chipping in a lot of money for it, right? And at the time, right, only a few more people of color are at university, right? So GI Bill, it's almost only white people outside of HBCUs, right, that are in universities. Then you have the boomer generation, the little bit less white, still pretty affordable. You get to my generation, Gen X, Now you kind of got to work full time during the summer and half time during the school year to get through. But you'll probably have some debt when you get out, right? And so that's as like the amount of people of color coming into the educational population, right, is increasing. And now, right, as we're getting a more and more integrated higher education population, right, you don't get out of college, right, without mortgaging your future unless your family can pay for it. Right?
I was lucky that I had no debt. I consider that to be like a great gift that I had. Whereas 70 years ago, everyone going to college was like, yeah, who has debt? I mean, like we all went for free, right? Or at least the vast majority did. I never even thought until you pointed this out of combining these two trends. That, in the 50s, higher education was whites only. Like, if black people were going to the college, it was either a special institution that was founded specifically for that purpose, of which there were only a handful, or they were escorted by the National fucking Guard, right? In order to cross the gates of that university. To now, we have a much better, admissions is far more race blind than it used to be, and people of all races go to colleges to not a perfect extent, but obviously it happens now. It didn't before. To combine that trend with the trend that, hey, 70 years ago or so, university was free, and now you have to pay hundreds of thousands. You put yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to go. Holy shit! As college became more inclusive, it also became more expensive simultaneously, such that basically just white people of our grandparents' generations went for free. Now black people couldn't go. Now that black people can go, it's super expensive to go. I never thought of those two trend lines are going in opposite directions at the exact same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's really interesting political research about this too, right? So in the 1950s, and I have not memorized these statistics, but in the 1950s, the majority of white voters supported the idea that government was supposed to help and that everybody would need help sometime, and sort of a broad support for things like the New Deal, where government was seen as an agent to help you, and you would pay taxes and you would get something back for it, right? As soon as our sort of body politic and people in higher education, as soon as that began to be integrated, white support for this idea of a collective sort of government response plummeted.
Yeah.
Right. It just went way down. And then you see the rise of Reagan and Nixon and, that all the stuff that sort of sets up where we are today.
I mean, we covered this on my show, The G Word. It's one of the most important facts about the 20th century, that as soon as government help, government assistance of any kind started being given to more than just white people started going, it's wasteful. We got to stop giving it out. Look at these bad people getting the government money. And then, the New Deal age of governments helping people buy homes, go to college, all the sort of supports that our grandparents had and that we don't have started being taken away, specifically because suddenly they were going to black. I mean, the most obvious example of this is, I've brought up on the show before, what happened to public pools. That, there used to be public pools all across America. What happened when, very important place that was desegregated was public pools. The white people closed the pools down and they started putting them in their backyards and country clubs instead. And now, I dare you to find a public pool in America in a place that is not, still consistently super white, right? And that is sort of, you can look at almost the entire history of 20th century America through that lens, but it's one of those things that's invisible until you actually bring it up and talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, working on the book, I was really surprised at just how consistently white people sort of are like, well, everything, and it can be generous if it's for us, but the second that we start integrating, right? And this is, it's not every individual white person, right? But sort of overall, white voters are like, as soon as we got to share with people who aren't white, we're not really into it. Like, we're not, that's not what we're here for. And it becomes, I think ends up biting us in the backside, pretty consistently at this point, right? Because increasingly, we actually do need some kind of help from government to be able to afford housing, right? To be able to afford healthcare. And these are all ideas that we've sort of allowed politically to buy into this idea that, well, we have to make sure people really deserve this, right? And whenever you hear about people need to deserve this, usually what we mean in the U.S. is, well, we want to make sure that Black people aren't going to get this because we're worried about whether or not they would really deserve it, even though it'd be fine, right, if white people were the ones intended to get it. And then there's this weird metastasization of that idea, right, where you start getting this more and more punitive system. You normalize the idea that you're supposed to constantly be proving whether or not you deserve stuff. And then just that's how the system works. And now that we've let capitalism get so much more aggressive and unfettered, where people do need more help, what we have is this really punitive system, right?
Yeah.
So increasingly, like, white people are caught up in that as well.
Yeah, it ends up hurting everybody. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of white people listening to this show, perhaps thinking, well, hold on a second. I was not helped out that much by the federal government. Well, you might want to ask yourself, were your grandparents helped out by the federal government?
Trust me when I tell you that this is revelation times. People are coming out clearly saying how they have been benefiting from what happened to black folks. And this is our white people. They're giving anecdotes from their white families, things that they have been going through, the experiences that they have seen themselves firsthand, how they've benefited from black folks. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about slavery and racism. These has benefited them. And so I took my time, watched the video, and I'm not able to share the full video because it's 1 hour plus. It was a live stream, but I'm sharing it here with you. And I happened to find how this video touched people, and probably I know it hasn't reached you. That's why I'm disseminating this information to you. So I'm gonna give you how people reacted to this issue. How did people receive this issue? Because when black folks talk about these facts, people are ready to shut them down. Immigrants are ready to shut them down, saying that stop complaining. While they're complaining, while they're saying that black folks are complaining, these are the benefits that the oppressors enjoy in your absence. So listen to what these people said. Someone said that these are the kinds of talks and podcasts that should be people be talking about, because these things affect people. And I agree 100%. These are things that people should talk about. And as they usually say, the truth shall set you free. And this is something which is happening. Somebody said, my grandfather returned from fighting in World War II only to be denied the promised GI Bill benefits from his service to our country. It was especially painful when they made jokes about it, and Adam laughed, knowing the reality of the situation. Wow, but as a black man in America, the expectations is that I should just endure it and lift myself up my bootstraps, and now the burden fall on me to erasure of my family, of my children follow suit without any financial support from either me or the government. Hashtag reparations. Yeah, we have a lot of people who did a lot of things to America, and they haven't benefited away from them. They haven't benefited from it. The GIs, Illinois, whose lineage is American descendant of slavery, that is adults, as you know, didn't get the GI Bill either. This was nationwide phenomenon, not just in the South. I think this is American lady, she said that. Somebody also said, the scene in Hidden Figures where Kevin Costner takes down the sign never happened. Those men barely acknowledge the historical women portrayed in the movie. Somebody also said that reparation for descendants of slaves in this country will be right thing to do. Somebody said also, support reparations for black Americans. Somebody said this, I'm a black female journalist on Facebook. I recently talked about news story that said that because of an algorithm, black people who needed kidney transplants were automatically placed lower on the transplant list than other people who were on the same stage of the disease. That's because the algorithm assumed that, for example, a black person with stage 4 kidney disease wasn't as sick as a non-black person with stage 4 kidney disease. That's crazy. Come on. That's really crazy. That's really crazy. The problem just recently was corrected, with black people put on kidney donor list based on their stage of illness instead of race. Damn. Damn. But I swear, one woman tried to argue with me because she insisted that non-black people were now being slightly slighted because black people would be treated like everyone else. You can't make that up. That was so sad. Imagine you are being put on waitlist depending on your race. If you're a white person, you're being put up. If you're a black person, you're being put down. That's white privilege at its core, happening today. That's systemic racism. This is what we are talking about in this video. And when I hear such kind of things, and when I try to disseminate this information, when I receive 8 comments from people, I will just look at them and say that, yo, what I'm saying is true. I'm not lying. At least what you can say, I'm an African. I might not be receiving these things which are happening, but thanks to the internet, I'm also seeing things which are happening. And what if I disseminate this information to my community? People who value such kind of information. For those people who don't always want to watch this video, I mean, somebody never forced you to click the video, you know? And I'm glad and thankful to the community, to the people who always say thank you to the things that I do, because mostly to them, they can't even access these videos. But for me, if I have a platform to put you through to see them and to talk about them so that we can have a discussion, I find it some people resonate with it. And if this video serves you, I hope that you're fine wherever you are. So for me, I always don't care about those people who talk badly about my channel or what I do. I'm a black supremacist or what, you know. These are things which happens, and we need to talk about them, you know. Somebody also said that I push back anytime I hear the claim that social programs and government aid should be earned, and usually it uncovers racial bias, whether intentional or subconscious. Somebody said, I think this conversation very eloquently highlights these ideas of cutting off one nose to spite their face. It's like how we talk about patriarchy at men too. I've always thought it like 100-meter race, where the average middle-class white person starts at the 75-meter point and everyone else starts somewhere between -20 point and 20-meter point. However, the truth is that racism has pushed us far back, that what 100 meters race to 50-70 years ago is now 400-meter race. White people are still starting at 100-meter yard line, but now they have to run 300-meter just to accomplish the same thing that their grandparents did, 1/12 of the effort. People of color might be starting at 10 to 50-meter point, but we still have to run a 350 to 390-meter race. I know this comment is going long, but I was speaking to my mother yesterday about how I'm about to surpass an annual salary of 6 figures, and yet I'm not living lavishly. I have 2 cars that have an average age of 20 years old. I'm living comfortably, and I can cover unexpected expenses as long as they are not crazy big. If I made this money 40 years ago, I will be classifiably rich, and that's what is so crazy to me. That is both the erosion of American dream, the American dollar, and the American standard of living. Damn, this is crazy. And you know, actually it resonates with me because most of African Americans who come to Africa, and they told me that most of the resources that they had, they worked for it for years. While you find a 16-year-old white boy living lavishly because he inherited these things, but a black person, he doesn't have anybody to inherit from, so he has to work so hard, he has to work for a long time so that he can gain this. And mostly they start becoming rich at their age of 40s, 45s, some to 50s, because they have to work for it. And this explains the 70-meter, 50-meter that these commentator, I don't want to expose the name, was trying to talk about, and you'd say that there is no white privilege in America. There is white privilege in America. Crazily, an African is talking about it because I understand the things which are going out there. And let's talk about it, because this conversation is not old. It's so fresh. It's so fresh. And look at how many black folks who are working so hard, working their ass off to provide for their family for many years so that they can feed. But you find a 15-year, 16-year who is living lavishly because they inherited the white privilege. Talk about what's crazy. This is crazy, man. This is so crazy. Somebody said, I guess I did receive money. It's so strange the way we think about money, because we have this toxic individualist culture that's just receiving money, monetary help, most especially from family, is something to be ashamed of. I know many people who will insist on financial struggle and literal starvation and wear it as a badge of honor, fueling delusional of grandeur. Before asking family for a dime, it's nonsensical to me. This is the last comment that I'll read. Thank you. I often ask why people have these conversations in a bubble. The construction of being colorblind is a luxury only afforded to white people. I don't get to be blind to inequity, not teaching my son that he cannot wear a hoodie or run in my neighborhood could literally be the difference between life and death. Not telling my daughter that she does not get express anger could literally stop her upward mobility and also mean death. These things which are happening are crazy, 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 crazy. Okay, I'll read the two last comments, not the last, but this is the last comments that I'm going to read. I've decided to add the two. Let me see. Somebody said, and this is a white lady. Yeah, there's a reason why I'm going to read it. Adam, the character is called Adam. Thank you very much. Yet another interesting guest and outside of the box topic. I discovered your channel just a week ago, and I have to tell you that you are one of the best hosts I've ever seen. No one else is able to maintain such a balanced and respectful discussion with their guests. It is truly an art. The way that being middle class works in this country, when it works, if you try to pull up the ladder after you get yours, the odds are you or your family is not going to stay middle class for much longer. Somebody said, Black Americans, sir, not African Americans. Most of us have never ever been to Africa. I don't want to get back to that discussion. Guys, tell me what you think about this in the comment section. If you're watching this video for the first time, you can consider subscribing to my channel, join my membership, and see what I can offer you. Until then, peace, love, and harmony. And also, before forgetting, if you have a video suggestion that you want me to talk about or disseminate to people, also reach me through my email. Until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.